1972's Venezuela. The people of this country literally called themselves the Saudi Arabia of South America, and they were overflowing with pride. Rightfully so. Back then, Venezuela was one of the wealthiest countries in all of South America. Their democracy was actually working. Oil was practically gushing out of the ground. And with that money, citizens were driving American cars and flying to Miami just to go shopping. The elite in Caracas, they spent their vacations in Paris. We're going to be fine. We have oil under our feet. That was their absolute belief. Now look at Venezuela today. Over half the population is living below the poverty line. Supermarket shelves are completely bare. The power goes out multiple times a day. Millions of people have fled the country. Just since the 2010 seconds alone, over 7 million people have escaped Venezuela. A country holding the largest proven oil reserves on the planet became a nation filled with people who can't even afford to buy a single drop of gas. How is this even possible? And if you think this is just a Venezuelan story, it's not. Take Nigeria, the biggest oil producer in Africa. Yet, over half of its citizens survive on less than $2 a day. Angola, the second largest oil producer in Africa. The poverty rate is over 50%. Equatorial Guinea, it has one of the highest GDS per capita in sub-Saharan Africa, all thanks to oil, but the vast majority of its people live in abject poverty. Why? Because that money never actually reaches them. Iran, Iraq, Libya, they sit on unbelievable amounts of oil, but they are drowning in unbelievable conflict and instability. Let's flip it around. Japan, almost zero natural resources. No oil. No iron ore. Yes, they're the third largest economic superpower in the world. South Korea, same story. Literally nothing comes out of the ground there. But they dominate the globe with semiconductors, cars, and shipbuilding. Switzerland, no resources, yet it's one of the wealthiest nations on earth. It's weird, isn't it? Shouldn't having more resources automatically make you richer? But reality proves the exact opposite far too often. Economists have a name for this. They call it the resource curse. Let's break down exactly how this curse works. Step by step. Country strikes soil. A tsunami of cash floods in. Do you know what the very first thing to happen is? The exchange rate shoots up. The value of their own currency skyrockets because of the massive influx of petrodollars. When the currency goes up, export companies get hammered. Their products become too expensive for the rest of the world to buy. The manufacturing sector loses all its competitiveness. Agriculture takes a massive hit. 2. Imported food suddenly becomes dirt cheap, putting domestic farmers out of business. Eventually, every single industry outside of oil just collapses. Economists call this Dutch disease. It's named after what happened to the Netherlands in the 1960s when they discovered massive natural gas reserves in the North Sea and completely wiped out their own manufacturing base. But honestly, that's just the beginning. The second thing that happens is far more lethal. When oil revenues are overflowing, the government no longer needs to collect taxes from its citizens. Why is that a problem? Because without taxes, democracy decays. Do you know what historically unites the countries that develop strong democracies? High taxpayer rebellion. No taxation without representation. That was the battle cry of the American Revolution, right? The British tried to collect taxes, and the American colonists rebelled. People who pay taxes naturally want to monitor how their money is spent. They pressure the government. They hold them accountable. And eventually, that dynamic creates a democracy. But in an oil-rich nation, that entire process is thrown in reverse. Instead of collecting taxes, the government literally hands out money to the citizens. They give out subsidies, free electricity, free water, dirt cheap gasoline, They use this to pacify the public. And since the citizens aren't paying taxes, they don't really have the moral high ground to make demands. You can't march on the Capitol yelling, "Where is my money going?" when you never paid any money in the first place. The government, in turn, has absolutely zero incentive to actually treat their people well. They can just survive on the oil money. This right here is exactly why so many oil-producing countries are dictatorships. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE. Now you kind of understand why they still maintain absolute monarchies. Right. Oil is the literal fuel for dictatorship. Then there's the third problem. Oil money does not spread out evenly. Whoever controls the oil controls exactly where that money goes, and the person or group holding that control will never, ever let it go. Look at Nigeria again. The oil mostly comes from the southeast, a region called the Niger Delta. It's mostly populated by minority ethnic groups like the Igbo and the Ijaw. But where does the oil revenue go? Straight up to the federal government. And the political elite from the majority ethnic groups up north end up pulling all the strings with that cash. Meanwhile, the people actually living on the land where the oil is pumped, they are left impoverished, marginalized, and suffering from catastrophic environmental pollution. What do you think happened to all that anger? Starting in the 1992, armed rebel groups started popping up in the Niger Delta. They started blowing up oil pipelines and kidnapping oil workers. Even today, Nigeria hasn't fully resolved this conflict. Oil didn't become the glue of unity, it became the raw material for division. Remember what we talked about in part 3, those botched, straight-line borders. When you pour oil on top of those borders, it literally becomes a bomb. Let's talk about Iran. Iran is a really unique case. In the early 1950s, Iran actually had a democratically elected prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh, and he made a massive announcement he was going to nationalize the Iranian oil industry, which was entirely controlled by the British at the time. His logic was simple: Iranian oil should belong to the Iranian people. Do you think Britain just sat back and accepted that? No, they teamed up with the Shia and orchestrated a coup. 1953. Mossadegh was ousted. The Shah was brought back into power, kicking off a brutally oppressive, pro-Western dictatorship. And 25 years later, the pent-up rage from that coup exploded. The 1979 Iranian Islamic Revolution. The Shah's monarchy collapsed, and Ayatollah Khomeini took over. The US overthrew a democratic government to install a dictator, and in return for that dictator, they got a fiercely anti-American theocracy. In their desperate attempt to control the oil, they created an enemy they've been fighting for over 40 years. Even today, look at the tensions between the US and Iran, the nuclear issue, the proxy wars in the Middle East. If you dig deep enough into those roots, you will always hit the 1953 coup. A single drop of oil ended up writing 70 years of history. Now, we absolutely have to talk about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is one of the top oil producers in the world. A single state-owned oil company, Iran Coup, generates over 70% of the entire country's revenue. Do you know how this country is run? It's ruled by a royal family, the House of Saud. There are no democratic elections. Political opposition is absolutely forbidden. Women were only allowed to talk starting in 2018. That was just a few years ago. But do you know why the citizens don't rise up and overthrow them? Because oil money is quite literally showered over the population. Practically free electricity, dirt cheap fuel, massive government subsidies, education and healthcare are largely free. Even if you're unemployed, you get financial support to live on. The royal family is basically pacifying the public, making sure nobody gets angry. Economists call this a Rentier State. It means a state that isn't funded by the hard work and taxes of its citizens, but simply by collecting rent on its natural resources. Dictatorships survive a very long time in Rentier States, because the citizens literally have nothing to demand from the government. The government gives them money, gives them services, so the people just leave the politics to the royal family and go about their lives, or literally bot out their democracy. But here is a wild twist. What happens when the oil runs out? Saudi Arabia is wrestling with this exact question right now. This is exactly why Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman launched the Vision 2030 plan. He's trying to prepare Saudi Arabia for a post-oil world, diversifying the economy into tourism, entertainment, and high-tech industries. But there's a huge catch. Can a population that has been completely dependent on free oil money for decades suddenly transition to a system where they have to grind, work, and actually pay taxes? And the moment they start paying taxes, aren't they going to start making demands of the government? Aren't they going to start demanding democracy? That transition period is the single most dangerous moment for the Saudi monarchy. Oil is what propped up the dictatorship, which means when the oil vanishes, the dictatorship might crumble right along with it. The resource curse isn't just a curse when you have the resources. It's a curse when you lose them, too. Let's look at an exception. Why was Norway different? Norway also discovered massive oil reserves in the North Sea in 1969. The resource curse should have hit them right in the face, but it didn't. Instead, Norway became one of the wealthiest, most stable countries on the planet. Why? Because when Norway struck oil, democracy was already deeply, firmly rooted in their society. They already had a powerful civil society. They had transparent rule of law. The oil just happened to be discovered on top of that foundation. The Norwegian government didn't just blow the money. They started pooling the oil revenues into a sovereign wealth fund, the government pension fund. Today, that fund is worth well over $1 trillion. It is the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. They didn't squander the cash on the current generation. They locked it away for future generations, long before the oil was ever found. Norwegian citizens were already paying taxes. They were already keeping a hawk's eye on their government. And their habit didn't change just because they suddenly got rich. It was democracy first, resources second. For so many countries in Africa and the Middle East, it was the exact opposite. The resources erupted from the ground long before a democracy could ever take root. That one difference in timing completely altered their destinies. Let's circle back to Venezuela. 1998, Hugo Chavez becomes president. He was a hero to the poor. He used oil revenues to fund massive social welfare programs for the lower class. He slashed illiteracy, provided healthcare, built public housing. And at first, it really worked. The poverty rate dropped. The public went wild for him. But gradually, Chavez started consolidating power. He crushed the opposition. He controlled the press. And critically, he completely politicized the state-owned oil company, PDVSA. He kicked out all the professional managers and replaced them with his political cronies. The actual engine, gears fled. Maintenance on the facilities fell apart, and oil production began to plummet. And then 2014 hit. Global oil prices absolutely crashed. Oil that was over $100 a barrel nosedived into the 30 seconds. The Venezuela economy collapsed almost overnight. An economic structure that was meticulously designed to rely on absolutely nothing, but all revenue was completely annihilated by a single price drop. Because every other industry in the country had died a long time ago. Hyperinflation kicked in. In 2018, the inflation rate hit over 1,000,000%. The Bolivar currency became literal trash. People started digging through dumpsters just to survive. A country holding the world's largest oil reserves of people lining up at gas stations because there was a gasoline shortage. That is how unbelievably cruel the resource curse really is. So, where is the geography in all of this? It's right here. Resources are entirely dictated by geography. Humans don't get to choose where the oil is buried. That was decided by geological activity hundreds of millions of years ago. And surprisingly, that geological activity didn't care about national borders. The fact that oil is buried in places like sub-Saharan Africa isn't because those countries are weak or strong. It's just because the Earth's crust shifted that way eons ago. And like we talked about in part 3, the borders drawn on top of those reserves weren't based on ethnicity or culture. They were drawn by Europeans with rulers and pencils. So when oil erupts from the ground under a botched border, the immediate question becomes, whose oil is this? Does it belong to the whole nation? To a specific tribe? To a specific region? That conflict breeds civil war. It breeds dictatorship. It breeds corruption. Geography creates the resources, and those resources create geographical conflict. It is a vicious, endless cycle. Minus, let's wrap up today's story. When you pull up to a gas station and pump gas into your car, have you ever stopped to think about where that fuel actually came from? It might have come from the Middle East. It might have come from Africa. In the process of pulling that oil out of the ground, someone's democracy was sold off. Someone's river was polluted. Someone's tribe was fractured. A rebel army was born somewhere. The resource curse isn't just a curse for the countries that have the resources. It is a curse intimately connected to the countries that consume them. And as long as we refuse to see that connection, the curse continues. The earth holds the resources. Those resources create power. That power drives people. And those people write history. But the beginning of that history is always just a single point on a map. The exact point where the oil is buried, minus in part 7. We're heading to the Himalayas. We're going to look at how the highest mountain range in the world forged two completely distinct civilizations. Why India and China managed to live next to each other for thousands of years, barely even knowing the other existed. And how the cultural divide created by those mountains is exactly why they are beating each other with clubs on the border today. See you in the next one.